professionals and those alike, welcome to the exciting three-part series of Media Exchange, where we will be bridging the gap, if you will, between media and communications with the government, as well as talking all things trending in the communications realm. We're going to do that with some subject matter experts, and you do not want to miss this three-part series that will cover things like countering disinformation and accountability. Of course, as Trinbagonians, our storytelling must be explored, and we will certainly define and perhaps redefine what is new media. I'm Ian Coville, and I'll be doing so with some exceptional persons. This morning we're talking new media, and to do so I am joined by our Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister responsible for communications, the Honorable Simon de Nobrega. Now, he's been a driving force behind the transformation of government communications in Trinidad and Tobago, with a keen focus on leveraging new media strategies and revitalizing the government's presence across digital platforms, ensuring that the dissemination of information is not only effective, but also engaging and accessible to all citizens, something I'm sure we can all agree is very, very necessary. Under his guidance, the implementation of initiatives such as communities of practice has fostered a more cohesive approach to the government's messaging, strengthening the fight against disinformation, which we'll certainly explore, and nurturing the transparent and collaborative relationship between government and media. Minister de Nobrega is passionate about empowering citizens to make informed decisions and is dedicated to fostering a media landscape where the government and press work hand in hand to serve the public good. So, Allison Nas, an entrepreneur and attorney at law with over 20 years' experience monitoring media content, including pioneering the digital tracking of broadcast spots in the English-speaking Caribbean, not just Trinidad and Tobago. Since 2011, her focus has been on monitoring, measuring, and analyzing Caribbean media content, including advertisements, news, public relations campaigns, digital marketing campaigns, and of course, social media conversations. She's a former president and chief executive officer of the Copyright Music Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, better known as COT, and a former chair of the Nova Committee of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Damas is committed to regional integration, and her vision for Media Insight is to become the global leader in real-time tracking, measuring, and analysis of Caribbean media content. Allison, welcome.
Thank you so very much.
We are also joined by Brevard Nelson of Caribbean Ideas Synapse. Brevard is the co-founder and director of Caribbean Ideas Limited, the parent company of Synapse Academy and Influence, and is also a managing director of Synapse, the subsidiary dedicated to helping Caribbean brands and businesses become more globally successful and influential through the power of technology and modern marketing techniques. He has over 25 years of experience in balancing left-brain activities like digital solutions, coding, data analysis, fintech, and then right-brain activities like playing music, dancing and creative arts, and of course, storytelling. He's a father, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and especially focused on supporting the next generation of leaders. Now, in 2022, Brevard would have been appointed as one of the youngest independent directors of the Board of Directors for the Trinidad and Tobago Unit Trust Corporation. Brevard completed an executive education program at the Harvard Business School and holds a master's degree in management, international marketing communications, and is currently pursuing a master's of law at the University of London with a focus on computer and communications law. Good stuff. He also completed fintech and AI certification from the Wharton Business School, so a man who knows what he's talking about is also joining us as well. Good morning and welcome, and thank you very much for all making the time to have this conversation. Because when we're talking new media, I immediately think by the time we've said it, something else has come out and made it obsolete. So first off, new media. What is it, Allison, if you'll take a dab at it?
I don't know if in 2024 we can still be talking about new media. I think really what we're talking about is digital media. We have the convergence of communications with the internet, and that has led to an explosion. So for example, when we're talking about digital media, we're speaking about online news outlets, we're speaking about blogs, about podcasts, and a subset of that, of course, is social media. And it's actually interesting. Imagine Facebook was started 20 years ago, right? We had Instagram in 2010, that's 14 years ago, and even TikTok, so 2016, right? And that's the beauty of technology. It's always changing, always developing, and of course we have to keep up with it.
Yeah. And the man who's keeping up, do you want to add or?
Sure, I think there's a good place to start, right? The term new media really just emerged coming out of the internet and digital technologies, right? So when we start creating content for these various platforms, as Allison said, I mean, the first term, I think, new, is really the guiding term. So social media, blogs, digital platforms, all of these things are different forms of digital communication channels and content that people use as you go forward.
Simple explanation.
Right? Well, yeah.
Now, considering that you've just given me your expert perspective now, let's talk about the consumption or the use part of things. I am no expert, but I'm very familiar with everything that you've just exemplified. So can we delve into a little bit of how the average man on the street uses these? We all have social media accounts, but we are also bloggers and we're also content creators. So is it safe to say that the average person, Trinidad and Tobago, regardless of economic background, educational background, or any other demographic, is a new media producer?
Yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of digital media. Once you have a smartphone, you can be a reporter, a journalist, all right? Content creator, influencer, thought leader, all of these things. So it is really about the democratization of media.
I love that, the democratization of media. Yeah.
And yeah, I think the reality is that with new media, it has opened access to users for various channels, right? You've been able to use and consume content on various platforms. You can leverage technology and data in different ways. And so I think it really does decentralize and democratize the knowledge, access to information. So I mean, I'm old enough to know life before Google, right? Everybody say, we just do Google things. So the challenge for me is that when people say, well, I don't know how to use something or how to do something, I'm like, well, you actually have access to Google, right? I live in a world where there was no Google. And you actually had to learn something and create something, and a couple of days or weeks later, then you're able to be an expert at it. Right. So now you can download an entire video and view how to do something in seconds. So I think these new digital channels allow people to get access to different media at a faster rate. We're also very used to now instantaneous communication. So we've gotten very used to real-time communication. If you don't have the two blue ticks on any communication, you're wondering what's really going on, right? And the reality is that we've gotten used to that as a society, as people. And so when communicators and marketers are thinking about their own brands, they need to understand how the hyper-connected consumer is actually using these different platforms. I would also say that new media has also opened up, economic opportunity, if you will, right? So the reality is that, e-commerce on these different platforms have also allowed users to open and conduct transactions on a global scale, even access suppliers and transcend geographic borders and boundaries. And so also even giving rise to the gig economy, right? So where people, freelancers and people who have skill sets can actually provide services online, and they don't necessarily have to be in the same space, they can work remotely. Right. So again, these are all opportunities where the users themselves can actually leverage the various platforms and new media specifically to their advantage.
Well, the advantages that you've just exemplified are paramount. But more than that, I wanted to get specifically back to the democratization of the, well, democratization generally, because
Yes.
immediately it talks about accessibility, and as you see,
Yes.
not needing to be in the same space, which makes our government much more accessible to us. There is a difference in the average user or consumer even when information is being shared digitally. How has that impacted communication between the citizens and the government?
Well, both Allison and Brevard have spoken about the democratization as well as the opportunities. The reality that we also have to face is that while that happens, without a view of responsibility in those spaces, it then becomes a challenge as you try to inform and educate a population. Because the opportunities that you speak about, the gig economy and all these things, have also led to a monetization of platforms where you now have to deal with edutainment,
Yep.
where there is not a focus on the data. There's if we have to be honest, it's not often a focus on fact,
Yep.
but more about views and clicks, engagement. And so therefore, it does pose a real challenge. Of course, it is beholden on the government to speak in a certain way and to speak from a position of responsibility and of fact.
Okay.
And that requires very often some time. You know, you're not always able to divulge all the information around any one particular event, initiative, discussion, negotiation. But at the same time, in that void that we all know nature abhors, people who enter into it in order to give their own opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
But the issue is that opinion also very often masquerades as fact. So it does create a challenge. It does create a challenge for us, but it is no longer new media, Allison and Brevard. I want to tell you, I agree with you wholeheartedly. So it has to be something that we embrace. It has to be something that we embrace not only from a government communications as a perspective, as a ministry, but each individual ministry speaking in the way they speak, speaking to their specific public, and then also from our perspective, creating a cohesive narrative, showing where different ministries are working together to deliver on a specific policy objective. Not always, I suppose, being spoken about in terms of this is phase one is this ministry, that ministry, that ministry, that ministry. But it is important for us to create that cohesive narrative across government, speaking to the population.
So, Minister, we can agree then that it has helped to make that communication of that cohesiveness easier. I would say the visibility from a consumption standpoint is much more significant than I can ever remember, even though I may have been less involved when I was younger, perhaps. The ability to see the information, access it, and engage with it is far greater, undisputed, across the board for any ministry across Trinidad and Tobago. Now, that leads me to wonder from the consumption part, not the expert part, what your personal experience has been in terms of engaging with media houses, otherwise, other citizens, taking that collective data and being able to use it or share it, and perhaps create action based on that feedback. There must be that level of positive to it, yes?
There is. I think all of us on this panel are old enough to remember life before social media. Where it was the news, it was the magazine, television shows, it was the papers. And that was really how, and informed conversation. You listened to your elders, you spoke to people who knew what they were talking about.
Right.
But there is a positive to it. And it has been something that we have been driving at the ministry to upskill all our brother and sister ministries in order to speak in real time, not just rely on a media release that will never be consumed in its totality, but speaking in those bite-sized, which again is a challenge as well, but we have seen that, and we do utilize it in order to get feedback and then further interact with the population. So we will partner and collaborate with ministries or state agencies or divisions on any initiative. And in that space, you allowed the ability, I suppose, to respond on comment threads, share information, and those kinds. And that has often been a challenge. Again, I come back to nature abhorring a vacuum. So if you say that there is this opportunity, and then you don't say how to access it, and you don't treat with the obstacles that a citizen may encounter, very often there is pushback on it, or there is a perspective that this is not for me, or this don't work, when it may not be that.
When I'm sure, Allison, because you monitor actual conversations on social media, you can give some insights on how that has impacted us thus far. Because if we're using the example of the ability to not just get the information, this course exists, this is where you register, but to ask questions immediately, the efficiency, the uptake in certain things, and the activity, if you will, reactivity of the citizenry probably has been significantly impacted. Has it?
Yes, certainly. At Media Insight, we say social media is like the focus group that never sleeps. All right?
That's apt.
Because everybody, it's instant, it's real time. And, in Trinidad, everybody has the opinion, and we're not afraid to voice those opinions.
Right.
There are no filters, so we can say exactly what we want to say. So I think it's important for government communicators to keep abreast, to know what is being said, about who, what are the topics that are creating the buzz, but more importantly, to take a more strategic approach, so to be proactive, all right? We're living in an age now where in order to manage, we have to be able to measure. So we need to set SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, and then we have to measure and see how we perform against those goals. So if we are targeting particular communities, we have to ensure that we are reaching those communities, that they're engaging with the content, and that we're listening, all right? And that we actually take action based on what we are hearing. Even if it may not be what we want to hear, but, we have to deal with the reality.
About taking action and even if it's not what we want to hear, could sometimes look like changes in how you utilize these new media, this new media rather. Tell me a little bit as to what you found are trends for us in Trinidad and Tobago, and do they differ, Trinidad versus Tobago?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important for communicators to optimize their omni-channel strategy.
In
right?
layman's?
Just understand that you have multiple channels, and you need to use the different channels appropriately to communicate to the audience that you're going after. Understand your persona, understand who you're speaking to, and what channels they actually do use. Because sometimes people may think, well, we're just going to use Facebook, and that's the only channel we use, or we're going to use Instagram or TikTok because that's the latest thing.
Right.
However, your audience may not be there. So you need to understand how you optimize your multi-channel or omni-channel strategy to really resonate with your audience. And once you plan that out, understand your audience, plan that strategy, then you can determine, well, what's the content that I'm going to create on those various platforms? Because it's not the same. Some people use the spray and pray approach, and they're like, the same piece of content on every platform doesn't work. You need to understand the platform, understand who uses that platform, customize, and even some cases, curate content for that specific platform, right? And so once we understand how people use new media and new media trends and their consumption habits and practices, then we can start creating a strategy, not the other way around, right? Most times people would think, I create the strategy, I will put it out there and they will consume it. No. Where the users are, is where you go to and you create your content to ensure that you pull them in to your brand. And so when it comes to trends, there are a lot of businesses and media houses that have really disrupted behavioral patterns, right? And when I think about trends, I really think about disruption in behavioral patterns and even industries. So for global examples, Netflix, for example, has disrupted the TV entertainment cable news model with their streaming subscription model. Because now you can consume content on demand. Binge watching is a new normal now, right? Whereas, of course, with regular television, you would have had to wait Thursday at 8 p.m.
Right.
for your favorite show. Now you can binge watch and look at your content an entire season, right? And that has disrupted so much so that other production houses and media houses have now adopted this model to compete. Even Airbnb, for example, right? They forced the hospitality industry and hotels and so forth to shift their model, so much so that New York had to outright ban Airbnb, and people having stays under 30 days. So the reality is even TikTok, as we mentioned, right? TikTok as a platform, even though Facebook allows video content, and as does Instagram, but TikTok with its algorithm has also revolutionized the short form video content and of course encouraged, especially during the pandemic, challenges and so forth on the kind of content that people use.
Right.
So when you are thinking about the full array of solutions, you need to not just think, well, it's a silver bullet on one particular channel that's going to work. You need to now think about what are the platforms that work for you and leverage that in your omnichannel strategy.
That sounds to me like we have a lot of learning to do. We still have a lot of growing to do, but a lot of possibility and positivity that we could utilize in terms of making sure that we are reaching the people are reaching us. When we talk about media and that on-demand consumption, it sounds to me like a challenge for standard or traditional media, but an opportunity in terms of developing these additional channels. Ravad, what would you say, where would you put it? As a challenge or as a possible?
Well, it really is how you think about it, right? So, for example, the concept of breaking news in traditional media has evolved exponentially with new media, right? So everything is breaking news. Like all social channels and platforms, you get in constant feeds of news throughout the day.
Right.
So when you have a 7 p.m. newscast or evening newscast, no longer is the news or the content that you share, if you maintain the same approach, that is not new. So what you then do, how you evolve, is that there's breaking news throughout the entire day, but in the evening, when you actually do have your audience, you're able to now recap, but also provide additional analysis and in-depth review and so forth of certain kinds of content.
Right.
So again, it really depends on how you look at the opportunity. I'm an optimist, obviously. And I use, whether it's evolution in technologies like AI, for example, and other platforms, I see it as an opportunity because it allows you to scale exponentially. It allows you to reach a vast audience, more than you would have actually just with one channel or one medium, and transcend borders and geographic boundaries. So, as a communicator, you need to understand where your audience is, where they're spending time, and the content that needs to be resonating with them on those channels.
Allison, you're in agreement completely.
Yeah, complete agreement.
I think then we could probably explore the options of the government, of other large-scale communicators. And when I say large-scale communicators, those who have very specific messages that need to be shared and have to counter that misinformation part of things. We are embracing the opportunity to do this on a more appropriate time, if you will, whenever the consumer wants it, making sure it's accessible to them through all these mediums. So we understand that completely. But when we get into sharing that message, how do we get feedback? And I know that is an important part of policy creation. What are we looking for, or how do we approach the opportunity to harness the responses and translate that into possible changes or adjustments to policy? Allison, lead the charge. What does that look like for us?
So I think it's very important for us to be able to listen and to know what people are saying on the various social platforms. And then the government, like I said, can respond to that to show that they're really taking on board what the various groups and communities are saying, and really to get their buy-in and their input. I think that's critical in policy formulation and implementation.
Minister, do we have examples of actually utilizing that opportunity or enacting that opportunity rather?
So I think you can see particularly in, say, recent, that the government is utilizing our social media platforms in order to take advantage of that two-way street that communication is. Very often, we had seen a sort of a model of tell and sell, yeah, and what we have now moved, or we are moving and driving, particularly through the Ministry of Communications. It's OPM Communications, but if my boss says Ministry of Communications, I suppose it's less of a mouthful, right? So yes, we do utilize our platforms in order to get back information.
Right.
And as much as we've spoken about the sort of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, but we are also looking at X, we are also utilizing LinkedIn, we are also utilizing YouTube. Yeah. But we also see this as part and parcel of an entire suite of interaction initiatives that include face-to-face, that include those sorts of meetings, that include traditional media as well. Because we, as I think both of you all would have said, we also have to dissect our general public,
right,
particularly by age demographic. Know where those people are going to be.
Yep.
So yeah, we do utilize it. We utilize it very often when we are speaking about initiatives of a particular ministry. What used to happen, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because of course this is organic, and as you grow, you learn, right?
Right.
Very often it was after the fact that you talk about it. You know, and we did this, as opposed to this is upcoming. This is upcoming, and what we've seen is it's actually driven communication between ministries.
Yes.
Because very often communicators in ministries were also siloed in their own approach.
Right.
So we want to show what the ministry has done, as opposed to how has all of government been working through these various initiatives to move us towards this policy perspective. And we have seen, based on the feedback, and I have to tell you, particularly on those three platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, we have seen each platform performs differently for different ministries. Yep. So a ministry like Youth Development and National Service, TikTok is where they get all their feedback.
Right, yes.
Right? A ministry like Finance or Energy, you tend to see a lot more feedback on Facebook. But we have been utilizing those platforms in order to drive these communication initiatives to younger audiences, because we, unfortunately, are also living in a time where, because, I don't know if it's a chicken and egg, you guys will see, right? We have so many spaces to share and consume content, but it does not necessarily equate to a more informed society. Right? So it is difficult, but we are utilizing it.
How do we approach that challenge, Prabhat?
Well, I was going to just weigh in on that last point, because there are so many different platforms. The real challenge, particularly for government communicators as well as marketers on the whole, is parsing all of that data and analyzing it to actually optimize your strategies for your audience.
Right.
Because there's a lot of data. Each platform in and of themselves actually generates a lot of data, information and insights about the audience and the users and so on. So what is important is that there are many tools that you can leverage, of course, to do that. But you can create, I've seen people creating dashboards that are now analyzing usage across each of these platforms by demographic, looking at persona types and determining, well, okay, for this particular group, as Benessa said, they favor TikTok. So therefore, the kind of content that we place on that platform, we now tweak because the video, short form video type or content worked well with this demographic on this platform, so therefore we're going to use that.
Makes sense.
Right? And so analyzing the data, I think sometimes people just go into it blindly and they just figure, well, there's video on TikTok and they just put it up. But these platforms have their own data, and it's important to take that and analyze that and craft your strategies based on that.
Allison, I see you smiling.
Well, yes, because of course that's what we're all about. As Brevard said, I mean, again, one of the benefits of digital and social media is that, yes, there are those built-in metrics, which is really crucial for determining how you're going to fashion your communications and your conversations. And of course, you can also look at it, there are also platforms and tools like Media Insight where you can take a holistic view across all the various platforms, and therefore look at the demographic and the psychographic information so you can really tailor your content and ensure your messages are reaching all the various audiences that you want to reach.
So what I'm hearing is very much great possibilities for making sure that how we communicate and who we communicate to is effective and impactful.
Yes.
And then it brings us to how we're using it for the citizens to be empowered and make better decisions. Because yes, we will explore misinformation and all of the challenges therein, but to underscore the ability of the people to use these new media, this new media, Allison's going to be mad at me for using this too, but digital media and social media to maintain democracy, to hold you accountable for your promises, your actions, your follow-ups, to make sure that voices are being heard and action is being taken. It is a very massive undertaking, but sounds very possible from what we're describing this morning. Do we see that happening right now?
Yes. So I think we are seeing, I think Allison touched on it, Trinidadians are nothing if we're not opinionated.
Yes.
Right? So I think that freedom of expression is very alive and well in this country.
Absolutely.
I think that in terms of these platforms being utilized by media, being utilized by the citizen, it does show that there are no obstacles or barriers to freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom to, unfortunately for those of us who have to treat with them, freedom to say what you think, unfettered in many ways. So I think in there is more than enough opportunity. And it is, of course, up to the government or any business that would be utilizing these platforms. And I tend to go to platforms as opposed to new media because, again, what is new media, right?
Valid point.
But utilizing these platforms to be able to sift through what is a real request for information, what is a real criticism,
Right.
and of course, what is just trolling
Yep.
or a means to borrow your term, rather, to disrupt.
Right.
So you do have to. That is a reality, and of course, the ministries and the ministry itself that is tasked with communications, that is an active pursuit. We are utilizing the data that is available to us in order to know where we should be messaging and how we should be messaging. What is the messaging that allows us to tap into that desire for authenticity when you're communicating on different platforms, to be able to not speak third party, but allow the those persons, whether that is a minister, a permanent secretary, a CEO, who are tasked with responsibility for a particular action, for them to be the one speaking,
Right.
so that you don't have to always, well, not always, you always have to deal with it, but it reduces the impact of pulling 10 seconds or 5 seconds of a
Right.
speech and utilizing it out of context, because that information is there on the very platforms that are being utilized.
Now, a big part of the purpose of all of this collaborative effort, this exact forum and others' use of the platforms as opposed to new media, is really to make sure ultimately our society is more informed and empowered. Are we able to measure that perhaps, or confirm that it actually is happening through use of these platforms? So Allison, you can read the data. You could tell us that people are speaking more or using this particular word even more. But how do we translate that data into determining whether or not it is making positive impact, and how do we see that impact in our society? What does that look like? Can you exemplify what that might be?
Yes, because we can see, for example, how do the citizens feel about a particular policy, new legislation being introduced, because one of the things we can measure is sentiment, right? Is it a positive, negative, or neutral feedback, and therefore we can respond accordingly.
Right.
So we can try and convert the naysayers and maybe have a neutral position by presenting the facts to discount, to cancel out any disinformation or even misinformation. Yeah.
And while there is a distinction that we will make soon,
Yes.
I'm wondering then how much of that is, or rather how easy it is to share that with the public. Hear me out. Bravad, maybe you can help me here. If we are looking at quantifying emotions or sentiments, that's incredibly difficult, almost contradictory. But what I'm hearing sounds like with the advent of these platforms, with new media, we possibly can. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, I think there are dashboards that allow you to understand what is trending, what mentions, and as Minister said earlier, one opinion in the noise and the clutter of social media may not be an issue. But when you start seeing 2, 3, 10, hundreds of people starting to talk about an issue, then you know that there's an issue. But with these platforms, it allows you to proactively react to these trending issues and treat with them with information, with facts, and avoid any viral issues or problems that will plague that can plague you and your ministry and your government, right? So leveraging the platforms and using that data allows you to get ahead of it. And I'd say also, because new media gives everybody a soapbox that they can mount and give their opinion, and everybody, a blogger, independent media, there's been a rise of independent media houses. I think during COVID I saw, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest, in the press conferences, a number of media houses, some of them independent media, popping up.
Right.
Which is good, because then you get a diversity of opinions and questions. And in the past, where for you to unearth issues that were happening, you really had to, people will block the road, or there would be something that there would be some protest or something, and that's what draws your attention to it. In the world of new media, when something goes viral, you start seeing that there's a problem, but you can use these platforms to get ahead of that.
Right.
Right? And it's important to continue to monitor. So services like Allison's and other platforms, continue to listen, continue to monitor, so that you understand what the real issues are, and then ensure that your strategy is not static.
Right.
Your strategy needs to be organic and basically be optimized based on what's happening. You can't say, well, this is what we're going to communicate and this is how we're going, when in fact there's an entire conversation about you, your brand, your ministry across here that you burying your head in the sand with.
Right.
Just to continue on that as well, you're absolutely correct. We have been very focused on upskilling the ministries themselves on how, besides how we are building content, but how do we utilize the data to measure? But the other metric by which we also measure the success is also in threads. We have started to see a lot of our threads on, not the platform threads, on our comment threads, becoming self-regulating, which tells us that you actually have more people who are informed and who will push back against an uninformed position. And to give you a perfect example of it, there was an initiative that was government-led, but through the Ministry of Youth Development. It's called the Youth Agriculture Homestead Program, right? So it's a 2-year program. 1 year it's very classroom-based. Another year, these young farmers are actually out in the field. And then at the end of it, in a collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Land Settlement Agency, these young people that's sort of 16 to 35, then get a 2-acre plot. And that 2-acre plot comes with a grant, comes with a starter home, but it is tied to agricultural practice, and there are things that you have to achieve in order to keep going. There was a distribution ceremony that was done in Chatham. 149, 150 young farmers all getting these plots. And of course, when you speak about it, now we have been talking about it all along. We have this event, and young people are there. They have gotten their plots. So we start talking about it on social media and on TikTok, which is again youth development. You started to get where was this? Nobody ever hear about this. And this is also part of the conversation that happens. Young, I have to assume it was young because they were there, right? But they're the ones who started to know and put in links, and you will see all over social media. This was being spoken about. Instead of coming to this platform to make bacchanal, maybe what you should be doing is following these. And it was refreshing because it tells me, okay, maybe not as fast as I would like it, but people are becoming more informed, and these comment threads are becoming self-regulating, which is always good news for us.
I think by arming the users on these various platforms with facts, so most times brands run into problems when they bury their heads in the sand and they don't use new media channels to communicate proactively to their audience, right? So by using the platforms and giving the facts, spreading the information, maybe even responding to misinformation, then that arms your audience, people who are supporting your brand, that arms them with facts so they can respond. Because when they're faced with, think about it offline, right? When you're in a conversation and you're alignment with your friends, but somebody tell you something as if it's fact. If you don't have the information yourself, you can't say, well, hold on, no, that's wrong. So the only way that you could share the link, as Minister mentioned, or correct people on the threads, is in fact if you yourself have the information. And that's why brands that actually use it and use it well are the ones that excel.
Well, from this conversation, I'm pretty sure a lot of brands are going to improve their strategies. We're going to have the sentiments recorded properly, and more importantly, use it to make sure that we maintain better communication amongst our publics and empower our citizens. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I'm looking forward to so many more. But this Media Exchange episode is going to wrap on this note, as I'm going to learn a little TikTok dance to enhance my audience. Thank you very much to Brevard, Allison, and Minister for joining us as we continue to have these insightful conversations that you don't want to miss on Media Exchange.